to provide my perspective as to why it's going to be difficult to replicate what we had in the past. Actually, this comment is going to help us to look into the novelties coming from the monitoring framework. This slide here provides a picture, very succinct but very useful picture. So in the previous rounds of the global GPDC monitor process, the data gathering took place across countries about the same time, within the space of 12 months, roughly, 10, 12 months. One of the big changes introduced officially in Geneva is to create a different kind of system. That is a system that is based on waves of countries. So we're going to have countries providing their data in 1 year, other countries providing their data in a different year. So the entire monitoring process, instead of being captured in 1 year, instead of focusing on one year in 12 months, it's going to be spread over several years. So this is an additional challenge when it comes to CSOs. And I remember that within CPD we were debating this point extensively, what kind of reaction CPD should have, what kind of observations CPD should submit when it comes to this new system based on wave of countries. So one of the concerns we raise is that having the monitoring process as is spread over years is very likely to be more difficult for CSOs to manage, because to keep CSOs focused on the monitoring process that is spread over 4 years might be more demanding. And we have a clear example of the situation, because when we have just to rely on our own resources instead of relying on a secretariat, get involved effectively is going to be very challenging, because you have to keep the momentum for 4 years, not just 12 months. So that's a big challenge. And so that's why it's going to be very difficult for us to replicate what we had in the past. As we are here, I can briefly summarize. So according to the new system, the data gathering process will take place over 3 years. And the 4th year is going to be the time for collecting, analyzing, reviewing, and collating everything into a global progress report. Let me note here that it was mostly CSOs that focused on having a final report, a comprehensive final report, because we were really keen on raising the point about coming up with a comprehensive picture that can allow to review trends across countries and across reporting cycles. At some point there were discussions, at some point there was the risk that a single global progress report might not have happened, might not have endorsed. So, and we were able to address that risk effectively, and now we know that we're going to have a global progress report. So, but let's start in a more coherent way from the first slide that we consider for this session. I think you are already very familiar practitioners, so I don't think we need so much time to spend on what a monitoring process is. But let's quickly recall that monitoring is about collecting, gathering data, reviewing data, and discussing the findings from the data gathering. So it's not just occasional fact gathering, it's systematic approach. And in this case, the monitoring is anchored to a set of indicators. So monitoring is not a very occasional, casual collection of facts, is monitoring in this case is a very comprehensive framework, including several steps. And monitoring is not taking place for the sake of that. It's not taking place for the sake of collecting data, but the ambition is really about providing evidence to inform behavior change. This is the general narrative, the storytelling. But we know from what Matt was telling us about the previous rounds, that the behavior change is possibly the part of this process that has not worked that much. This actually provides me with the opportunity to introduce two general reflections. One of these reflections is about one of the big messages from Busan. I would call it the mantra coming from Busan, was about setting up a process that was country-led. The language there was country-heavy and global light, as opposed, according to the donors, to what was happening before, to what was in place starting with Paris. According to them, the monitoring process that started in Paris and that was in place till Busan was rather the opposite, very heavy at global level and not very heavy at the local level. So this is what we have now is basically the legacy of that approach. Honestly, as CSOs, we could not object to that principle, because that principle captures the idea is that this monitoring process should be aligned with countries' systems. So that's the essence of this conversation, making sure that countries are not involved in extra layers of bureaucracy. They're using their systems, and so they can use their systems to provide information about the effectiveness process in this case. So everything sounds perfect. We cannot, as CSOs, say no to that. But the downside is that's my personal view, is that donors easily got off the hook. For the past 10 years and more, there's been no effective reporting on reporters' behaviors. On donors' behaviors. So we have to bear in mind these trends when we look at the monitoring process right now. And so in considering whether or not behavior change is actually generated through this monitoring exercise, we have to consider these long-term trends. We have to consider that over the past 10 years and more, there's been no consistent data on how donors have performed. It's fair to acknowledge that the Global Progress Reports over the past few years have included some annexes about donors, but not really comprehensive reports. And we're going to see that these concerns has been at last addressed with the new system. In short, one of the outputs coming from this new system is reports about donors. And this is one of those things that CSOs have been pushing for over the past few years. And so, in the years to come, we're going to see whether or not this promise will come true. But for now, let's consider that within the monitoring process, the element of behavior change has been possibly the less proficient, the less robust. Oh, well, this is again the sequence. This is actually going back to some of the steps we have seen with the previous slides. And so I guess we can just focus on the number of countries. And that number 15 now has evolved to 53. So now we know that 53 countries have committed to participating in this fourth monetary round. And so this is going back to the slide I used in the very beginning. This is very simple, very effective. You see the different stages. So the data gathering now will take place between 2023 and 2025. And there is this commitment to publishing the Global Monitoring Report in 2026. Let's note here that the previous monitoring report dates back to 2018 and 2019. So this report will cover a gap of about 10 years. And this is a massive gap in terms of assessing global trends. In a best case scenario, we might see some country reports to be published next year, but the comprehensive report will come only in 2026. If I may have a comment from my perspective, I think this is one of the biggest failures of GPTC, not producing data, not producing data for 8, 10 years. And GPTC has consciously done this because GPTC embarked on this very long review process, and this is the end result, 10 years without data on global trends on effectiveness principles. These are examples, official examples, about how the data, the findings from the previous reporting cycles have been used. I would, for instance, notice that 45 countries have used the data into all their own development plans. Even 55 international reports drawing findings from the GPTC monitoring, 20 multi-stakeholder meetings. These are official numbers, honestly. I have no reason to question the accuracy of these numbers, but it would be interesting to have a reality check, actually. The meeting of 20 multi-stakeholder meetings, what's behind these multi-stakeholder meetings? I'm quite critical, possibly a little bit cynical, but this is not enough, surely. This is not what we need. And there is space with this new fourth monitoring round to improve. Why so? Here again, I'm very, very glad to recall that as CSOs, when we were part of the discussions about changing the monitoring process, well, I recall we were part of an initial survey, and the initial survey by the joint support team of the GPTC was about what you think we should change, what do you think that data are good enough or not. And one of the points that we made at that stage was that the challenges were not related to gathering more information, but the challenges were about making sure the information you gather is actually used, is actually informing behavior change at the national level. So at that time we came up with some suggestions. One of these suggestions was making sure that countries are properly informed about the findings from the monitoring process. And we actually started floating this suggestion about systematically organizing dialogues in countries and systematically drafting countries' responses to the findings. Slowly, these ideas have been endorsed officially, and now we're going to see this later. We have country briefs, we have action dialogues. So I would say that some of the ideas that CSOs did introduce in this reform process were reflected to some extent in the official final decisions. And this is a very nice picture about how this monitoring process should take place at the country level. You see that there are 5 stages: inception, data collection, data review, final submission, dissemination results, and reflection, okay? And it's going to take, you see, about even more than, yes, it's 12 months, exactly, and plus the reflection and dialogue and action process. Well, I like this slide because it tells you about the mechanic behind this process. There is a national coordinator, national focal point, and this is a person coming from the government. So we know that governments are leading on this process. If I may suggest another interesting reading, there is an official GPDC document that is actually providing some information about what a GPDC is expecting CSOs to do. It's a very interesting document, very easy to read, and very clear, and it clearly states that this is a government-led process. And here is the first challenge that we need to face, for instance, about those countries going through very difficult situations in terms of political environment. If you're dealing with a government that has no record or has bad record of involving stakeholders, we can easily assume that even this case, in the case of the GPDC monitoring process, the consultation with stakeholders will be problematic. So let's be clear here. There are no guarantees that CSOs are involved. Governments are encouraged to involve stakeholders, but they can go their own way. And interestingly enough, the GPDC official documents themselves are noting that when there are these problematic situations, local NGOs and CSOs can refer to the global CSO constituency to seek advice, to seek support. And more specifically, they can refer directly to CPD. That's very interesting to note that CPD's role is officially included in that paper. And I think Matt was noting earlier that a joint support team should have, or is expected to have, a map of the CSO focal points. So once you are in the inception stage, well, the inception stage should include national meetings, national outreach. That's the expectation. and then you start a data collection. The data collection is based on a questionnaire coming with different sections. And once we have a national focal point, below the national focal point, you have focal points for constituencies, including a CSO focal person. Here again, the language from the GPDC is very revealing. The language for the GPDC says that the national focal point is supposed to consult, to use consultation processes when existing in countries to identify the focal points, including CSO focal points. So I think the first reality check you may want to go through is whether or not your relation or the CSO relation with the government in your country are working. If not working, the kind of options you may have. But if they are working, if, for instance, you have a CSO platform that has established relationship with your government, you may want to relate to this CSO platform, if it's not you directly, obviously, to understand what kind of conversations they're having. Or you can go through the joint support team or to the CPD to have a reality check between the global and the local level. Okay, so this is specifically about the CSO enabling environment assessment. which is one of the sections of the larger questionnaire. And this is where CSOs are expected to provide data. So CSOs will not provide data on the entirety of the issues addressed through the questionnaire, and we're going to go through these issues later. But CSOs will be involved in the data gathering process just around one element, that is the CSO enabling environment assessment. As we have understood, governments in countries have a lot of space to adjust this process. So in some countries, things may go better, and CSOs might be invited to provide their views on other elements of the questionnaire. But let's not forget that CSOs will never, or any other stakeholder, will never submit data directly into the global process. Data will have to go through the government focal point. Here again, the fact that this process is heavily led by governments. In the reflection process, all stakeholders are expected to come together and to have a look at the general findings. So this is the stage when CSOs as well will have the opportunity to discuss the findings about the other components or dimensions of the monitoring process. Donor partners will go through a similar process. Private sector will go through a similar process. Okay, so we're coming to an end to this section. This is just a very quick picture of those countries that have committed to the monitoring process. You can spot your own country, Samoa, for instance, in 2023, Honduras, in other countries as well. Yeah, 2023 is kind of a conventional year, because obviously we learned that they themselves had the training just a few weeks ago. So 2023 is the starting point of the monitoring process. This actually means that the other stages, including the country briefs and reflections, will have to take in 2024. And this is actually reflecting some of the things I introduced earlier. So when you're going to receive the PowerPoint, you're going to see this list of the different steps that CSOs will have to consider or will get involved into. You see inception, data collection, review, and dissemination. Okay? And rightly enough, also, it's important to note that also in the case of the Kampala principles, CSOs can be involved to specific areas. Some CSOs frequently ask questions, and this is actually also coming from the official GPTC document. I would just draw your attention again. The participation of CSOs is not limited to one focal point, but the focal point is expected to consult with other CSOs and to gather information and to liaise with the national coordinator. Obviously, here again, there are no assurances that this is going to happen, and that's why we need to have a strong CSO network to make sure that we can raise red flags, we can reach to the joint support team. So we have to make sure that we have a robust CSO network that can step in whenever we notice that something is not working appropriately. I guess it's my time to stop.